The paper was already waiting for me when I walked into the kitchen that morning. It sat in the center of the table like an unwanted guest, thick and white and perfectly aligned with the edge. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the air. My son Evan was sitting across from it, his elbows on the table, fingers tapping against the surface with the same rhythm he used when he was a child caught lying. Claire stood by the window, pretending to check her phone. For a moment I thought they were going to tell me something good. Maybe news about their jobs, or a vacation plan for the kids. Something normal, something kind. But then Evan pushed the paper toward me. "Mom, we've been thinking," he said. His voice was soft in a way that only sounded soft. "You've been living here for a while now. We've been covering everything, but things are getting tight. We thought, maybe you could start contributing. Just a little rent." Rent. The word echoed like a stone dropping into water. Claire spoke next, too quickly. "It's just a formality. Everyone should help with expenses. $600 a month. It's fair." Fair. That word has teeth when spoken by the comfortable. I looked at the paper. It was printed in clean black ink, the kind that never smudges. Residential lease agreement. My name was already typed in the blank spaces. Lessee, Marley Holland. I pressed my thumb against the page. My own name looked foreign there, like it belonged to someone smaller. I could have said no. I could have reminded them that this was the house I built with their father 40 years ago, when our hands were still strong and our backs didn't ache. But I didn't. I only looked around the kitchen, the cracked tile behind the sink, the window I had picked myself, wide enough to let in the morning light, the burn mark on the counter from the year I spilled gravy on Thanksgiving. I remembered the sound of my husband's laughter that day, the way he told me we would fix it later, and how we never did. That mark was a scar of love. Now it was just proof that I had been here. Evan was still talking, but I had stopped listening. His voice blended with the hum of the refrigerator, a low and distant sound. I thought of the nights I had stayed up rocking him when he was sick, the mornings I drove him to school in the snow. None of that mattered now. What mattered was $600. He slid the pen toward me. "It's nothing personal. We're just trying to make things clear." Claire added, "It's better this way, Mom. Boundaries keep families healthy." I stared at the pen for a long moment. My hand did not move. Then, slowly, I picked it up. "I'll sign," I said. Evan looked relieved. "You will?" "Yes, but I'd like a copy for my records." They exchanged a glance. Claire's mouth tightened. "Of course." I signed my name. The letters were shaky, but legible. I had been a legal clerk once. I knew what signatures meant. They weren't just names. They were doors. Some opened, some closed. When I handed the pen back, Evan smiled. "Thanks for understanding." I nodded, but my mind was somewhere else. The paper between us felt heavier than it should. It wasn't just rent, it was a receipt for my own erasure. I carried the document to my room and placed it inside an old folder marked House Papers. The folder was faded and soft from years of use. Inside were receipts for the foundation cement, the window frames, the roofing tiles, things I once bought with my husband's paycheck and my overtime hours at the law office. I stared at those yellowed pages and whispered, "They forgot." But the house hasn't. That night I couldn't sleep. The house made new sounds I didn't recognize, small creaks in the walls, the faint whistle of wind under the door. It felt like the house itself was uneasy, like it sensed something had changed. From the hallway, I heard Evan and Claire's voices. "She'll get used to it," Claire said. "She has to," Evan replied. Their words were muffled, but not enough. I pulled the blanket tighter around me. The radiator clicked off. The silence stretched until it felt like a weight pressing on my chest. In the morning, when I opened the fridge, I found a note written in Claire's looping handwriting. "Please don't adjust the thermostat without asking. Electricity isn't free." I stood there for a long time, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold. The note fluttered slightly in the breeze from the vent. Something inside me shifted a small, sharp sound, like a hairline crack in glass. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into the same folder as the lease. If they wanted boundaries, I would give them records. And records, unlike people, don't forget. The days after that moved like molasses, thick and slow, stretching time in ways that made me feel both invisible and trapped. Claire's polite smiles became walls. Evan's silences turned into oceans. At breakfast, she set out 3 plates but filled only 2. We already ate, she said when I came downstairs. It wasn't true. The smell of scrambled eggs still hung in the air. She just didn't want me at the table. I washed my mug in the sink and looked out through the window. The garden was dying. The roses were nothing but brittle stems, the soil dry and hard. I used to spend hours there, planting, trimming, watering. It was the one place that always felt honest. Now even that patch of earth looked tired of me. When I asked Evan if I could buy fertilizer for the garden, he said, "Maybe next month, Mom. Let's keep spending to a minimum for now." Spending. I gave him my pension check every month, and still it was called spending. One afternoon, I tried to bake bread like I used to. The smell filled the kitchen. For a brief moment, the house felt alive again. Then Claire walked in, wrinkling her nose. "You didn't ask to use the oven," she said. "I didn't know I needed permission." "Well, it heats up the house. We're trying to save on utilities." She took the loaf out and tossed it in the trash. I said nothing. The silence between us was a battlefield where every word could draw blood. Later that night, I heard laughter from the living room. They were watching a show together, the light from the TV flickering against the wall. I stood by the door for a moment, just watching them. My son's arm was around his wife. The sound of their laughter once would have made me happy. Now it made me feel like a ghost haunting my own house. I turned away, went back to my room, and opened the folder again. I looked at the lease, the thermostat note, the utility bills. Each paper was small by itself, but together they told a story. A story where a woman built a home, raised a child, buried a husband, and then was told she owed rent for existing. I whispered, "Not yet." I didn't know exactly what I meant. Not yet to giving up. Not yet to forgetting. Not yet to losing myself entirely. The next morning, I woke to find a cardboard box outside my door. My old photo frames were inside, along with a note that said, "We need more space in the hallway." I sat on the floor with those photos. In one, Evan was 5 years old, his face covered in chocolate frosting, holding the first birdhouse he and his father built, the same birdhouse that still hung outside the porch. I touched the edge of the frame and smiled, not from joy, but from clarity. The house had changed. They had changed, but I had not completely. That afternoon, I went to the small hardware store downtown, the same one my husband used to buy nails from. The owner, Mr. Whitmore, was still there, older now, his hair white as the paint he sold. "Marley," he said when he saw me. "Been a while. How's the old place holding up?" I smiled faintly. Still standing. He didn't notice the tremor in my voice. He didn't need to. I wasn't there for nails. I was there for a folder, a small, fireproof one. I paid in cash and carried it home like it was a secret. That evening, I placed all my documents inside it. The lease, the notes, the photos, even the old mortgage receipts. I locked it with the tiny key that came with it and hid it beneath the loose floorboard in my closet. It wasn't revenge I was thinking about. It was proof. Because people can forget. But paper remembers. When I lay down that night, the house groaned softly in the wind. Somewhere outside, a branch scraped against the siding, a sound like writing on paper. The house was speaking again. And I was finally ready to listen. The note on the fridge had been replaced with a new one. "Please keep pantry items in labeled containers. Shared shelves only." The handwriting was perfect and pretty. The meaning was not. I stood there with a jar of tea leaves in my hand and felt something small inside me tip over. I put my jar on the lowest shelf. Someone had already written Claire on the upper two and Evan on the middle one. Mine did not have a label. I left it blank on purpose. Blank things are hard to own. By lunch, the house felt colder, though the sun was bright. I walked through the living room and stopped at the doorway. The couch was the same one I had found years ago at a second-hand store. I remembered the day we lifted it in through the side door because it would not make the turn at the front steps. Evan had laughed until he fell on the grass. Now the cushions were pale from wear, and there were 2 new throws I had not chosen. They did not match the room. Maybe that was the point. I told myself to keep moving. When the house begins to push you out, you have to keep a rhythm or you turn into a shadow. I made a list in my head. Sweep the porch, trim the dry stems, sort the hall closet. Small things that felt like stitches. Small things that held a life in place. I started with the porch. The old boards groaned under my feet, the way an old friend complains as it stands up. I swept the leaves into a neat pile, then paused when I saw the birdhouse in the maple tree. The tiny roof was crooked, and a nail had worked itself loose. I fetched a small hammer from the garage and climbed the step stool. My hands shook a little on the last rung. I straightened the roof and tapped the nail back into the wood. The sound rang clear in the morning air. When I climbed down, a neighbor from across the street waved. "Morning, Marley," she called. Her name was Diane. She had lived there for 20 years and still sent peach jam at Christmas. "You are out early." "Could not sleep," I said. She glanced toward the house. "Everything all right over there?" I thought about lying. I thought about crying. Instead, I said, "The garden needs water." Diane nodded like she understood the answer behind the answer. "I have extra mulch if you want it. My son is coming by this weekend. He can help you spread it." I smiled. "Thank you. I may take you up on that." After she went inside, I carried the broom to the back porch. When I reached the kitchen door, I stopped. Claire stood at the counter, whisking eggs in a glass bowl. She did not look up when I entered. "I was thinking of making lunch for everyone," I said. "We already ate," she replied, though the stove was not on and the plates were clean in the rack. She added salt to the bowl and looked at me. "Also, we are doing meal prep now. It keeps things organized." "Of course," I said. I waited a heartbeat longer than politeness required. Then I set the broom in the corner and went to my room. They called it the small room for privacy. I called it the storage room because that was what it had been. There was no door, only a curtain that did not reach the floor. One outlet, no window, the bed fit between the walls if I turned it sideways. The dresser they said they would move in had not arrived. My clothes hung on a rolling rack that wobbled when I touched it. I sat on the bed and listened to the house breathe. The sounds were different from the ones I remembered. Lighter, colder, more careful. I could tell when Claire opened a cabinet from the way the hinge squeaked, and when Evan sat at the dining table from the way the chair legs scraped. I could tell when they laughed. I could tell when they did not. That afternoon, I tried to read. The words would not settle. I picked up my journal instead. I wrote down small facts in clean lines. The porch faces east. The maple holds the birdhouse. The radiator clicks 3 times before it shuts off. I still own my name. When the pen slowed, I closed the book. I went to the hall closet to begin sorting. A stack of coats fell toward me. When I opened the door, I caught them with my shoulder. Among them was the dark wool coat that belonged to my husband. It smelled faintly of cedar even after all these years. I pressed my face into the fabric and stood very still. In the pocket, I found a folded paper wrapper from a winter fair where we had bought roasted chestnuts. I kept it. Objects have better memories than people. By evening, the light in the kitchen had turned the color of tea. Evan came in, set his keys on the counter, and smiled without showing his teeth. "Hey, Mom," he said, as if he were still the boy who dropped his backpack by the door. "Claire and I are going out tonight. Do you need anything before we go?" I looked at him for a long moment. It still astonished me that a face I had kissed 1,000 times could turn into something I did not know how to read. "Can I turn up the heat a notch?" I asked. "Just for my room?" He cleared his throat. "Let us keep it where it is. We are trying to keep the bill down." I nodded. "I understand." He kissed my cheek, quick and awkward, and left. The door closed. The house shook a little, and then settled. I made tea and sat at the small table in the corner. I did not turn on the light. In the dim room, the edges of things softened. The countertop looked almost like the one from years ago, before the burn mark. The sink looked deeper, the window wider. I let myself pretend for 5 breaths, then I put the cup down and stood up. There is a special kind of strength that grows in shadows. It is not loud, it does not strut, it waits, it watches, it takes notes. I had spent my life caring for a house and a family. I knew how to do both with patience. I could also unlearn the parts that demanded I disappear. The curtain at my doorway stirred as I went down the hall. In the living room, a new frame had appeared on the mantel. A photo of Evan and Claire at a beach I did not recognize, their arms around each other, faces tilted toward sun. The older photos were gone. Family vacation to the island, kindergarten graduation, the porch paint day when we laughed until our hands shook. I checked the hall closet again and found a box labeled Misk. Photos, my handwriting. Someone had crossed my name out. I lifted the lid and saw them all tucked inside, side by side, like people waiting for a bus that would never come. I carried the box back to my room and slid it under the bed. Not hidden, not displayed. Waiting. The next morning I woke to the sound of a conversation drifting through the window above the sink. Claire was on the porch talking to the neighbor who likes to walk her dog at dawn. I did not mean to listen, the words found me anyway. She should have thought twice before expecting a free ride, Claire said, light as steam. Honestly, we are being generous. The dog barked. The leash jingled. The neighbor murmured something polite. The wind moved through the maple and made the birdhouse tilt a little to the left. I stood there with my hands on the edge of the sink and felt the calm arrive. Not the sweet kind, the hard kind, the kind that makes your eyes clear. I did not argue. I did not cry. I rinsed my cup and wiped the sink dry. Then I put on my shoes and walked to the garage. The old plastic tub that said house papers was on the top shelf. I pulled it down and set it on the workbench. Inside were paint chips and roofing estimates and a single envelope that should have held the deed copy. It was empty. Dust rose in a pale cloud when I lifted the last folder. My throat tightened. I checked every envelope twice. I checked the drawer that sticks. I checked the tin box where we used to keep spare keys. Nothing. The tub looked like a mouth that had been cleared of teeth. I stood still until the dust settled back into the light. Then I closed the lid and pressed my palm to the plastic. The garage smelled like oil and old summers. Somewhere, a drip fell from a pipe and met the concrete with a hollow tap. The sound repeated. It was the sound of a metronome. It was the sound of time. I walked back through the kitchen and past the table where the lease had been. The surface was clean. The grain of the wood showed a long scar where we had dragged a heavy box 20 years ago. I traced it with my finger. There is a trail in everything if you are willing to feel for it. By afternoon, the sky turned the color of pewter and the wind picked up. I took the dark wool coat from the closet and put it on. It was too big now. The sleeves covered my hands. I liked that. It felt like protection. I stepped outside and began to walk. Not to run away, not to wander, to think. The sidewalks were wet from last night's rain. Small puddles held pale copies of the clouds. I passed the bakery where they know my name, and the post office where the clerk still asks about my garden. I stopped at the courthouse. I did not plan to go in. I went in anyway. The lobby smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. A woman at the records window looked up and smiled without pity. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," I said. My voice was steady. "I would like to see the property file for my address." She asked for my identification. I handed it to her. She typed, frowning in concentration, then nodded. One moment. While I waited, I watched the dust float in the light from the high windows. It moved like quiet snow. When the clerk returned, she carried a folder with a red tab. She set it on the counter and slid it toward me. "Take your time," she said. I opened it. The first page was a copy of a deed with my name and my husband's name, written in ink that had faded to the color of tea. My breath left my body and came back. The next page was a later filing. Words I recognized from a lifetime spent near legal paper. Temporary authority. Health event. Custodianship. Another line in small print that the eye could skip if it was not trained to look. I ran my finger under that line and felt the old skill rise in me like heat. The house had not forgotten me. It had been waiting for me to remember how to read it. The clerk let me take a copy of the page. I slipped it into my bag and thanked her. Outside, the wind tugged at my coat. The courthouse doors closed behind me, with a sound like a book snapping shut. I walked slowly toward home, one hand on the folder, the other tracing the worn bricks along the sidewalk. Each brick felt like a heartbeat. I passed the bakery again. The window smelled of cinnamon and sugar, but I kept walking. My mind replayed every word I had read. Temporary custody, health incapacity, but nowhere did it say revoked. My name was still there, faint but unbroken, 51%. It felt strange to see a number next to something as soft as belonging. Still, numbers are harder to argue with than love. At the bus stop, I sat for a while and watched cars go by. The paper in my bag seemed to grow heavier. I thought about the night I signed the medical forms. I had been weak then, frightened, more afraid of hospitals than of my own son. He had smiled and told me not to worry, that it was only to help with the mortgage. I had believed him, because believing is easier than suspecting betrayal. I closed my eyes and breathed until the air steadied in my chest. When I returned, the house looked smaller. The afternoon sun hit it from the side, showing every crack in the paint. Claire's car was gone. Evan's truck was in the driveway. I stood for a moment before opening the door. The hallway smelled of new detergent. My photos were still under the bed, the curtains still swayed with the draft. Nothing had changed, and everything had. Evan was in the living room, watching the news. "Hey, Mom," he said without looking away. "Hey," I answered. For a moment I considered telling him what I had found, waving the document in front of him like a flag. But the thought passed. I wasn't ready for a war. I was preparing for a siege. Instead, I asked about dinner. He said they'd ordered takeout. I nodded and went to my room. Once inside, I locked the door even though it had no real lock, just a hook I had added myself. I laid the folder on the bed. The pages glowed softly in the lamplight, the ink a faint blue river. I copied the key details onto a separate sheet and hid both under the floorboard beside the small fireproof box. Then, I sat back and listened. The house was quiet. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that waits to be broken. Later that night, I heard the front door open and close. Claire's laughter floated down the hall, light and easy. Evan's voice followed, lower, pleased. I listened to the rhythm of their steps, the sound of two people sure of their ground. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark. The outline of the window frame glimmered faintly in the streetlight. Somewhere outside the birdhouse swayed. A nail squeaked, the wind moved through the maple leaves, and the sound became a whisper that almost formed words. It said, "I remember you." The next morning, I made coffee early, before they woke. I placed 3 mugs on the counter, one for each of us, like old times. When they came down, Claire hesitated. "We usually just grab some on the way," she said. "I know," I replied. "This pot's for me." She looked relieved, as if she had dodged a question I hadn't asked. They left soon after. I poured myself another cup and sat at the table. The sun was bright on the tile. For the first time in months, the light felt warm, not intrusive. It touched the edges of the lease paper, where it lay folded beside me. And for a moment, I imagined the ink fading away, line by line, until the page was clean again. In the afternoon, Diane came over with a bag of mulch. We spread it over the garden in silence. The smell of soil rose rich and damp. She looked at me and said quietly, "You always keep things tidy, Marley. I like that." "Some things deserve tending," I said. When she left, I stayed by the garden a long time. My hands were dirty and my knees ached, but I didn't mind. The marigold seeds I had planted years ago were sprouting again, tiny green curls pushing through the earth. They had slept through frost and neglect, yet here they were. That was enough proof for me. Inside, the kettle whistled. I washed my hands and poured tea, watching the steam curl against the window. The house reflected back at me, the cupboards, the hallway, the faint outlines of faces in old photographs that still hung in my memory, if not on the wall. I whispered to the empty air, "I built you. You remember my name." That night, I wrote in my journal, "The deed still breathes. They think I have forgotten. The house has not. Patience is not weakness." I closed the book, blew out the candle, and let the dark settle around me. It felt different now, less like absence and more like cover. Somewhere, deep inside the walls, the warmth of the day lingered. I could almost feel the heartbeat of the place. I smiled in the dark, small and certain. Tomorrow, I decided, I would visit the courthouse again. Not to ask, to confirm. The house had forgotten me, perhaps, but I had begun to remember myself. The next morning began with frost on the window glass and the sound of Claire's voice drifting through the half-drawn curtain. I had been awake long before dawn. Old habits of worry keep their own schedule. The kettle clicked once, then again, like it too was hesitating to begin the day. Claire stood outside on the porch talking to someone, her breath showing in white clouds. At first I didn't pay attention. Then I heard my name. "She should have thought twice before giving us the house," she said. The words were soft, almost kind, but they fell like stones. Giving us the house. I set my cup down so quietly, it made no sound at all. The tea trembled. The neighbor mumbled something, polite and uncertain. Claire laughed and said, "It's better this way. She's lucky we're even letting her stay." Lucky. I almost smiled at the word. I stayed still until the door closed behind her. Then I exhaled. The air left my lungs in a thin stream, like smoke escaping a candle just snuffed out. I walked into the kitchen, each step deliberate. The floor felt cold beneath my bare feet. On the fridge, another note waited. "We'll be out late tonight. Please don't wait up." I took it down and folded it into the pocket of my robe. It joined the others, like pages in a secret book. By the time they left for work, I already knew what I needed to do. The garage was quiet, except for the sound of my own breathing. The light from the small window slanted across boxes, stacked high with things no one used anymore: old toys, paint cans, winter decorations. I found the plastic tub marked house papers and dragged it down from the shelf. The lid was dusty and stiff. I pried it open. Receipts, tax records, utility bills, no deed. I searched every folder twice, each page releasing a puff of dust and memory. Somewhere between the water heater warranties and the roof repair invoices, my hands began to tremble. I had kept everything. I always kept everything. But not this. The one document that proved the house was mine. The tub's emptiness gaped back at me. I sat down on the cold concrete floor, my knees pulled tight, and tried to remember the last time I'd seen the deed. It had been 2 years ago, maybe 3, after my husband's funeral, when Evan asked me to move in with them. Back then I was tired, still dizzy from grief. He had said he would help with the paperwork, that it would make things easier if something happened to me. I had trusted him. The memory returned sharp as glass. The hospital room, the smell of disinfectant, the clipboard in his hand. "It's just temporary," he'd said, his voice gentle, his smile practiced. "You'll still be on everything, Mom, I promise." Promises are heavy until they break, then they weigh nothing at all. I pushed the tub aside and stood up. The concrete left a damp circle where I'd been sitting. I brushed the dust from my palms and looked around the garage. Shelves, boxes, labels, all the signs of order. I used to take pride in that. Now, I realized order could be a disguise. That evening, when they returned, I watched them from the kitchen. Claire placed her purse on the counter and began sorting mail. Evan hung his jacket on the hook I had once bought for him when he was 10. He caught my gaze for a moment. Something flickered there, guilt maybe, or the memory of it, but it vanished as quickly as it came. I said nothing. They ate dinner together while I sat in my small room. The smell of roasted chicken drifted down the hall. I turned on the radio softly, not to listen, but to fill the space. Music helps lies dissolve before they echo too loud. After midnight, I rose and opened the fireproof box under the floorboard. The courthouse copy of the deed rested inside, folded and precise. My name still on it, 51%, enough to matter. They thought I didn't know. They thought they had erased me. I took out my old notebook, the one with the cracked leather cover, and began to write. April 12. Heard her say I gave them the house. I did not. Checked garage. Deed missing. Confirmed my name still present on record. Next step, verify transfer timing. Find witness. Find notary. The words steadied me. Each line was a rung on a ladder I could climb out of the hole they had dug. The following day, I went back to the courthouse. The clerk from before greeted me by name this time. "Back again," she said, with a smile. "Just tying loose ends," I replied. She helped me print a certified copy of the transfer documents. There it was, stamped and sealed, my son's signature, my own shaky one, the date 2 weeks after my surgery. I had been sedated then, signing whatever was placed in front of me. I studied the witness line. A notary public, someone I didn't know. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. I copied the name and address. When I left the courthouse, the sky had turned pale blue. The sun sat low, a thin coin behind clouds. I stood on the steps, holding the papers, feeling the weight of ink and time. For the first time in months, my spine straightened on its own. I wasn't just a tenant anymore. I was a woman holding proof. That night, when I came home, Claire was in the living room folding laundry. She looked up, smiling politely. "Busy day?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Productive." I placed my bag on the floor beside my chair and watched her for a moment. The television flickered behind her, showing a family in a commercial, laughing around a dinner table. Everything looked so easy there. "I was thinking," Claire said, "it might be better if you moved into the smaller room, the one near the garage. It's cozier." I smiled, just enough to make her uneasy. "Cozy," I repeated. "That's one word for it. She blinked, unsure what I meant. I didn't explain. That night, I moved my things. The air in the new room smelled of cardboard and dust. I placed the fireproof box beneath the bed, within reach. Before I turned out the light, I whispered to the dark, "You should have read the fine print, Claire." The house creaked in answer. Not unfriendly, almost approving. Outside, the wind stirred through the maple branches. The birdhouse swayed, a single nail gleaming in the moonlight, holding steady. Morning came clear and cold. I dressed in the dark, the way I used to on winter school days when I had to be up before the sun to pack lunches. The notary address was written on a small card in my pocket. I could feel the edges of it graze my palm with every step, a tiny blade reminding me to stay awake. The office sat above a barber shop that smelled like talc and old radios. The stairwell creaked under my weight. A small bell rang when I opened the door. Behind a glass partition, a woman in a navy sweater looked up from her computer. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" "I believe you witnessed a signature for me 2 years ago," I said. I gave her my name. "I would like to confirm the circumstances." She checked a ledger with neat columns. Her finger paused. "Yes, that was arranged by your son." She slid the book closer so I could see. He brought a stack of documents. "You signed here, here, and here." I remembered the antiseptic smell and the weight of a blanket over my legs. I remembered the clock on the wall with a second hand that jerked forward like a nervous bird. I did not remember the notary. I did not remember a room like this. "Were we in a hospital?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, it was at your son's house. You were on the couch. You looked tired. He said you wanted to get everything in order. You asked for tea. Then you signed." The image formed and settled. A couch, tea. Kind words that shaped a trap. "Did he explain the documents?" I asked. "He said they were temporary authority forms to help with the mortgage while you recovered. That is what I wrote." She tapped the notes column. "I only confirm identity and willingness. I do not judge content." I looked at the ledger a moment longer. Then I thanked her and left. The barber downstairs had a young man in the chair. The scissors flashed. Hair fell in soft whispers to the floor. On the sidewalk, I stood still and closed my eyes. The cold found my cheeks and steadied me. He did not take me to an office. He brought the office to me. Not a mistake then, a plan. I walked to the park and sat on a bench facing the empty baseball field. A crow hopped across the infield, head cocked, as if listening. I took out my notebook and wrote the details while they were fresh. Place, witness. Phrases used, the shape of the day. I underlined temporary authority and drew a small box around it. When the page was full, I turned to a clean sheet and wrote 2 words at the top. No more. I went home by a longer route, past the library and the small thrift store, where I once bought a lamp with a shade that made a room look kind even in winter. The bell on the door chimed when I stepped inside. I looked through the shelves without purpose until I found a wooden frame that felt solid in my hands. I bought it and carried it under my arm. At the kitchen table, I opened the fireproof box and placed the certified copy of the deed in the frame. I did not hang it. I set it against the inside wall of the box and closed the lid. Some victories need dark to grow. Claire came in while I was wiping the counter. She wore a scarf the color of a ripe apple. Her cheeks were bright with cold. "We need to talk about the grocery budget," she said, opening a spreadsheet on her phone. "Prices keep going up. We cannot keep covering everything." "I understand," I said. I dried my hands. "I can handle more of my own food." "That is not quite what I meant." She hesitated, then pressed on. "We need to formalize this arrangement. Utilities, shared spaces, house rules." House rules. A neat way to say, a person is an inconvenience. "What would you like me to sign?" I asked. She blinked, startled. "We can draft something simple." "Draft whatever you like," I said. "I will read every line." Something in my tone made her look at me more closely, as if a light had come on behind my eyes. She turned away and opened a cabinet that now held labeled containers. Her shoulders were tense. That evening, Evan came home late. He smelled like rain and coffee. He looked relieved to find the house quiet. We sat in the living room with the television off. The only light came from the lamp I had bought so long ago. He rubbed his hands together. "How are you doing, Mom?" he asked. "Fine," I said. He nodded, then stared at his shoes. "Claire thinks we should make things clearer. It will be easier for everyone." "Clarity is good," I said. I have always liked clarity. He swallowed. I know this is hard. It is not hard, I said. It is simply obvious. He winced as if I had tapped a tender bruise. We sat in silence. I could hear the clock in the hall. I could hear the wind make the porch steps sigh. I could hear my own breath and his. Do you remember the day we poured the foundation? I asked. He looked up. The question seemed to confuse him. I was little, he said. You carried a plastic pail, I said. You said you were helping. Your father told you that you were the reason the house would stand. You believed him. Something like shame crossed his face. It came and went quickly, like a cloud skimming a hill. I am trying to help now, he said. No, I said. You are trying to manage. His eyes flashed. Then he stood and said he had work to finish. He left the room. The house swallowed the sound of his steps. When the door to their bedroom clicked shut, I took the folder from under the floorboard and laid out the papers in a line on my bed. The deed, the transfer, the notary notes. I placed a blank page at the end, as if it were a runway. What needed to land there had not yet arrived, but the path was ready. The next morning, I took a bus to a legal clinic at the edge of town. The waiting room had 2 chairs and a plant that was doing its best under a fluorescent light. A young woman with clear eyes and a steady voice called my name. Her card said Hannah Graves. I told her my story without decoration. She did not interrupt. She asked precise questions. She wrote down the answers in a small notebook. When I finished, she squared the papers on her desk and leaned back. You still hold controlling interest, she said. That matters more than anything they have told you. I know, I said. I needed to hear someone else say it. We can approach this in stages, she said. First, we file a petition to confirm your ownership and to challenge any unauthorized occupancy. That does not mean they are criminals. It means the arrangement is not lawful as they describe it. I have no interest in humiliation, I said. Only in fact. Her mouth curved at the corner. Facts can be very persuasive. She explained the steps, notices, deadlines, the possibility of a hearing, the presence of a sheriff only if necessary. Each word was clean and cool, like stones set in a path across a stream. When she was done, she asked if I wanted to proceed. Yes, I said. Through a trust my husband and I set up. I would prefer discretion. Wise, she said. Then we begin. She slid a pen toward me. Read first, sign after. I read every line. Then I signed. My hand did not shake. On the walk home, the sky was a clean sheet of pale blue. The cold had thinned, and the sun touched the tops of the houses as if they were being blessed. I turned the corner and saw our porch. A package sat on the step with my name on it. I carried it inside and opened it at the table. It was a small clay kit I had ordered days ago in a fit of impulse. The kind a person buys when she wants to fix things with her hands, but cannot yet fix the big thing. I rolled a small coil and shaped it into a ring. It was crooked and ordinary and dear. I pressed my thumb into the soft surface and left a print. Then I set it aside to dry. Claire walked in and frowned at the clay crumbs. We have guests tonight, she said. Could you keep the kitchen clear? I will use a tray, I said. I brushed the crumbs into my palm and dropped them back in the box. The guests came, laughed, drank, and left. I listened from my room as Claire told a story about a fussy neighbor, and Evan described a problem at work that he solved with charm. There was a lightness in their voices that used to comfort me. It no longer did. Ease can be a mask. Masks slip. Near midnight, the house quieted. I stepped into the hall for water. As I passed the front window, I saw the reflection of my face. The glass caught something I had not expected. I looked taller. Not younger, not stronger, just taller, as if the floor had lifted me by an inch. Back in my room, I wrote one sentence on a fresh page. They took my softness for surrender. I closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. The dark filled the room in a gentle wave. A moment later, a small sound rose from the yard, a soft tap against wood, then another. The birdhouse was knocking on the night. I said aloud, I hear you. The next day, Hannah filed the petition. A week later, the first notice went out under the name of the trust. It gave them 14 days to respond. It did not say my name. It did not need to. At dinner, Claire read the notice at the table, eyes flashing. What is this? She said. Some clerical thing. We will ignore it. Evan did not answer. He held the paper in both hands, like a person reading a map and finding a river where he expected a road. I drank my tea and watched the steam curl. The silence between us filled with the sound of a truth returning to its home. The house approved, I could feel it. Later, in the small room, I lay awake and listened to the wind move over the roof. The sound was low and steady, a long-held note. It felt like the earth had taken a deep breath and decided to hold it for me until morning. The whispered lie had done its work. It had brought me here. The next sound I planned to make would not be a whisper. It would be paper sliding across a table, a door opening, a key turning, a future stepping in and taking off its coat. The morning the notice expired, the sky over town hung low and gray, like a ceiling too heavy for its beams. I dressed in silence, the paper Hannah had sent lying open on the dresser, proof of service complete. 14 days elapsed, no response. Words as simple as weather, but they meant a storm was about to clear. When I reached her office, Hannah greeted me with the same calm that steadies a bridge. She wore a gray suit. No jewelry, no perfume, only the faint scent of ink and conviction. They ignored the filing, she said. That helps us. I took a seat. What happens now? Now, she said, sliding a new folder toward me. We file a motion to confirm possession. It gives the court authority to recognize your claim and direct enforcement if necessary. Enforcement sounds violent, I said. Not violence, she replied. Precision. Her hands moved over the pages, arranging them in a clean stack. You will need to sign again, slowly this time, on your terms. I read every line. Each clause felt like a nail driven back into the frame of a house I once built. When I finished, she stamped the last page and said, "We will deliver this by hand. The sheriff's department prefers originals." Outside, a faint drizzle began. I opened my umbrella and walked to the courthouse, Hannah beside me. The rain tapped on the fabric in small, deliberate beats. The same rhythm, I thought, as the hammer that once drove the nails into my porch. The clerk at the counter recognized me. "Back again, Miss Holland." "Still tying loose ends," I said. She smiled and took the folder. Her fingers brushed the seal before she placed it in a tray marked Property Disputes. So ordinary a label for something that had consumed my life. When I left the building, I stopped on the courthouse steps. Below, the town moved as if none of this mattered, cars splashing through puddles, a teenager crossing the street with a donut in hand. The world does not pause for private justice. It only records its echo. That night I returned home with my coat damp and my heart dry. Evan was in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone. Claire sat at the table writing lists. "You got caught in the rain," she said, not looking up. "I did," I said. "But it was worth it." She frowned. "You should be careful at your age." I poured tea and smiled. "I am being careful now." Evan looked up. "Careful about what?" "About everything," I said. Then I went to my room. I placed the umbrella in the corner and laid the court receipt on my bedside table. The paper glowed faintly under the lamp, thin and powerful. Somewhere outside, thunder muttered low. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Precision." The next morning, the sheriff's office called to confirm delivery. The deputy's voice was polite. "Ma'am, we have served notice to the occupants at your address. They are aware of the pending action." "Thank you," I said. "You will be notified before any follow-up visit," he added. "I'll be ready," I said, and meant it. The rest of the day passed in a slow hum. I cleaned the pantry, folded laundry, tended the garden, simple acts, but each one was a rehearsal for the order that was returning. The marigolds had grown higher, their stems swayed against the wind. I knelt to tie them to small stakes. The twine bit into my fingers, but the pain felt honest. Work pain, earned pain. At dusk, Claire approached while I watered the roses. "Did you send something to the court?" she asked suddenly. I didn't answer. The hose hissed softly, turning soil into dark clay. "I saw an envelope with your name this morning," she pressed. "What are you doing, Mom?" "Finishing what your father and I started," I said. She blinked. "You sound crazy." "Not crazy," I said, documented. I turned off the water and walked past her. She stood there for a long moment before going inside. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote only 3 words. "They feel it." Then, I closed the cover and slept. The knock came 2 mornings later. I was in the kitchen polishing the kettle. The sound was firm, official, not a visitor's knock, I opened the door to find the same deputy from the phone call standing on the porch, hat in hand. "Miss Holland," he said, "just delivering confirmation. The court date's been vacated, ownership verified in your favor. Next step is voluntary compliance." "Voluntary?" I repeated. "Yes, ma'am. We give them 48 hours to vacate. If they don't, we enforce." His words were careful but kind. I nodded. "Thank you for the courtesy." When he left, I stood at the window watching his cruiser disappear down the road. The street looked washed clean by the night's rain. Even the air smelled new. By noon, Evan came home early. He looked pale. "A sheriff was here," he said. "I know," I replied. He set his keys on the counter. "Mom, what is going on?" I took a slow breath. "The truth, finally. You remember truth, don't you?" He rubbed his forehead. "This is insane. Claire says the paperwork is wrong." "It isn't," I said. I took the framed deed from the fireproof box and placed it on the table between us. "This was never wrong. You were." He stared at the paper as if it could burn him. "You don't understand," we thought. "I understand perfectly," I said. "You thought weakness was permanent. You thought silence meant consent." He opened his mouth, but no words came. The clock in the hallway ticked once, twice, 3 times. I picked up the frame, set it gently back in its box, and locked it. That evening, the house felt too quiet, like a pause in a symphony before the final note. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the door frames, the edges of windows. Each touch was a reminder. I built this. The plaster under my fingertips was rough in spots. I could still feel where the trowel had slipped years ago. Imperfect, but mine. After dinner, Claire cornered me in the hall. "You can't just kick us out," she said. Her voice trembled, anger braided with fear. "We have nowhere to go." I looked at her. "Neither did I, once. But I built somewhere. You can too." She stepped back as if struck. "You'll regret this," she said. "I already did," I replied, and walked away. In my room, I packed a small bag. Not to leave, but to remind myself how little I needed. A coat, a photograph, the small clay ring I had made. Objects of proof. I set the bag by the bed. The next morning, the sheriff called again. "They have 48 hours, he said. "We will return Friday to ensure compliance." "Understood?" I said. When I hung up, I looked around the kitchen. The light through the window was soft gold. Dust motes drifted in it like tiny promises. I made tea and sat at the table, the same table where I once signed a lease that was meant to erase me. The grain of the wood caught the light in thin silver lines. It looked almost like writing. I whispered to the air, "Your story is nearly written, my love." I wasn't speaking to the house exactly, or to my husband, but to everything that had held steady when I could not. Evan avoided me for 2 days. Claire stayed in their room. The house began to breathe differently, less tight, less cautious. I slept better than I had in years. On Thursday night, I walked out to the porch. The birdhouse swayed gently in the wind, and the maple leaves rustled like applause. Somewhere beyond the yard, thunder rolled again, low and satisfied. Inside, I set the kettle on to boil and poured the last of my tea leaves into the pot. The water hissed as it met them. I watched the steam rise, curling toward the ceiling like a signature. Tomorrow they would see the sheriff's car pull into the drive. Tomorrow they would understand that ownership is not just possession, but remembrance. The paper trail was complete, and in its quiet way, it was already singing. Friday arrived, like a held breath, the kind you do not realize you have been keeping until your chest aches. I woke before the light and lay very still listening to the house. The pipes clicked once. The maple brushed the siding with a sound like a match, struck and not quite catching. Far off, a truck changed gears on the main road, and the low note lingered in the air. I folded the blanket and smoothed the bed. When I opened the closet, the dark wool coat waited like an old friend who knew how to keep a secret. I touched the sleeve and left it where it was. I would not need it until the doorbell rang. On the table beside the kettle, I placed 3 things in a neat row. My identification card, the court confirmation Hannah had sent me last night, the small clay ring I had made with my thumbprint, still visible, a fact, a right, a reminder. At 8 the phone buzzed. "Hannah, we are on schedule," she said. "The deputy confirmed he is 5 blocks away. He will read the order. You do not need to speak. unless you wish. I will be there to observe." "Thank you," I said. I wanted to tell her that words like observe and schedule felt like warm bread this morning, honest and simple. Instead, I put the phone down and poured water over the tea leaves. The kettle sighed. I heard a door open at the back of the house. Evan crossed the hallway with quick, quiet steps. Claire followed, her voice low and sharp, the way steel sounds when it is rubbed with stone. They did not knock on my door. They did not ask for time. At least we were equal in that at last. I took the mug to the porch and sat on the top step. The air was cool and clean. Clouds moved like slow ships across a brightening sky. Diane waved from across the street and came over with her hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater. "Hard morning," she said. "Necessary," I said. She did not ask for details. Good friends do not cross a line they can see. She reached in her pocket and pressed something into my hand. A small red ribbon rolled tight. "For the birdhouse," she said, "so the wind knows who it belongs to." I smiled without trusting my voice. When she crossed back to her yard, I tied the ribbon to the little post under the roof. It fluttered once and then lay against the wood like a seal on an envelope. Inside, I set the empty mug in the sink and wiped the counter as if a meal had been prepared there. The house felt tidy and awake. I opened the fireproof box, touched the frame around the deed, and closed it again. Not a prayer, a habit. The cruiser turned onto our street at 9. I watched from the front window as it rolled to a stop. Behind it came a sedan I recognized from the courthouse lot. Hannah stepped out with a folder under her arm and an expression that said she had already counted the steps between the curb and the door. The deputy knocked with the same measured rhythm as before. Hard enough to be heard, gentle enough not to bruise the wood. Evan opened the door in a faded sweatshirt, his face slack with a sleepless night. Claire stood slightly behind his shoulder, jaw set, arms wrapped around herself as if cold had found her at last. "Good morning," the deputy said. "I am here to execute the order confirming possession and to supervise voluntary compliance." He read the language slowly and clearly. Dates, signatures, the instruction to vacate within the set period, the acknowledgement of personal property rights, the warning about refusal. Hannah nodded once at each sentence, as if placing stones in a garden path. Claire interrupted twice with questions that were not questions. The deputy answered with patience that had practice behind it. When he finished, he looked past them and met my eyes. "Miss Holland," he said, "would you like to be present for the acknowledgement?" "Yes," I said. My voice sounded like a bell. I stepped forward until I could feel the cool air from outside, lifting the hair on my arms. Hannah shifted slightly to stand beside me, not in front. Evan stared at the floor. Claire did not move. The deputy handed each of them a copy of the order. The page shook in Evan's hand, like a small animal that had learned fear late. "There is a key I need to return," I said, and reached into the pocket of my sweater. I placed a brass key on the hallway table. It rang against the wood, a quick, bright sound. It was not the key to the front door. It was the key to the garage drawer where the empty deed envelope had once lived. The drawer that stuck, the drawer he knew. He looked at it and then at me. He understood the message. "We will need until this evening," he said. His voice was hoarse. The deputy checked his watch. "The order allows 48 hours, he said. "We will return tomorrow at the same time. Please be prepared." They nodded. Hannah thanked the deputy and followed me outside. On the porch, she spoke in a voice meant for only one person to hear. "You were exact," she said. "That is rare on days like this. Exact felt better than brave. Exact felt like the word my husband would have used when he measured a window frame 3 times and cut once." I told her so. She smiled. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked. "No," I said. "I know how to make tea." She left. The cruiser rolled away. I stood on the porch and watched the wind pull at the red ribbon until it curved and then fell still again. The day stretched wide. There is an emptiness to hours after a decision is made that feels like a plain after harvest. It is not sorrow. It is the ground waiting for the next thing to be planted. I filled it with tasks that made the body move and let the mind rest. I wiped baseboards until the cloth came back clean. I sorted the flannel sheets from the summer cotton and folded each set like a letter. I cleaned the inside of the window glass and watched the street become sharper, the edges of things taking their place without argument. Around noon, A white envelope slid under my door. No name on the front. Inside was a check. The memo line read back rent. The amount was everything I had paid since the lease began. I felt a single sharp anger rise and pass. The check went into the fireproof box under the framed deed, not as a gift to me, as a confession to the house. In late afternoon, I walked to the hardware store for new screws. The bell over the door chimed, and Mr. Whitmore looked up with kindly surprise. "You again," he said. "What are we fixing today?" "A small house that hangs in a maple," I said. He nodded, as if this were the most ordinary problem in the world. He filled a small paper packet and added a thin screwdriver with a handle shaped for tired hands. "No charge for the tool," he said. "Some jobs require the right grip." On the way home, I passed the community center. A hand-lettered sign in the window caught my eye. "Pottery Open Studio, 3 to 6. Walk in, welcome." I stood there longer than I meant to, watching people carry small gray bowls to a table near the window. Their faces were arranged around patience rather than product. I did not go in. I stored the sign away like a good word overheard and kept walking. Back at the house, I climbed the step stool and tightened each screw on the birdhouse. The wood was warm from the late sun. When I finished, I tapped the roof the way a nurse once tapped my arm before drawing blood. A gentle warning. A promise that the hurt was almost over. Evening brought a strange quiet. No television, no music. Only drawers opening and closing in the back room, boxes sliding, the soft thud of books set down in stacks, the sounds of departure. I made soup and ate at the small table by the window. The spoon clicked softly against the rim of the bowl. I drank the broth to the last sip. It tasted like proof that the body remembers how to be steady when the mind is tired. I washed the bowl and dried it with the towel that still had a faint stain from a summer of berries. Then I stood at the sink and let the cold water run over my wrists until the pulse there slowed. A little before midnight, there was another envelope under my door. This one had my name. Inside was a short note in Evan's handwriting. It said, "Only I do not know how to undo a year." I read it twice. The second time, I folded it smaller and placed it between the pages of my journal. Not forgiveness, not yet. A record. I slept without dreams. Morning filtered through the window like water through linen, soft, persistent. I rose and made tea. The house was quiet. The hallway looked wider. The air smelled like cardboard and tape. When the knock came, I was ready. The deputy stepped in, with the same measured calm as before. Hannah arrived 2 minutes later. Together we walked down the hall. Evan and Claire stood by the door with 2 suitcases and a box between them. Claire wore the scarf the color of an apple again. For a moment, she looked very young. Then she looked hard and older than her years. "We are leaving," she said. Her chin lifted. "You will hear from our lawyer." I nodded. "I hope he is exact," I said. Evan held out a ring of keys. The metal caught the light and threw a small sun onto the ceiling. He hesitated. I held out my hand. The keys settled into my palm with a weight that felt like time returning to its right place. The deputy thanked them for their cooperation and walked them to the porch. There were no neighbors gathered. Justice done well is not a parade. It is a door that opens, a step taken, a threshold crossed. The sedan pulled away. The house swallowed the sound and then gave me back a silence I recognized from long ago. The good kind. Hannah touched my shoulder. "I will file the final confirmation this afternoon," she said. "You will receive a copy. Call me if you need anything." "I will," I said. "Thank you." When they were gone, I carried the keys to the kitchen and set them on the table. I stood there a long time, hands flat on the wood, breathing in the quiet. The light fell on the grain and turned it to thin gold rivers. I unlocked the fireproof box and lifted the frame with the deed. I did not hang it yet. I set it on the counter where the lease had once been and let it catch the morning. The house exhaled. I heard it, or maybe I only felt it. The same release a body makes when a tight band is finally cut loose. I went to the porch and sat on the top step. The red ribbon stirred once and settled. Across the street, Diane raised her mug to me. I raised my empty hand back. We did not need words. Behind me, the rooms waited, not empty, ready. The silent petition had done its work. It had not shouted, it had not broken, it had not begged. It had only written a clear line where a blurred one had been. There were chairs to move and sheets to wash and windows to open. There was a winter dust to lift and a spring light to invite in. I stood and went inside. The quiet did not feel like absence anymore. It felt like a room with a new coat of paint and a window opened for the first time in years. The day after they left, the quiet had a body. It walked beside me through every room. The air no longer felt heavy, it felt awake, stretching like a muscle freed from a cast. I opened every window. The wind moved through the house like a new tenant checking the rooms. Dust rose in the slanted sunlight. I stood in the middle of the living room and breathed. The scent of the wood returned the faint trace of wax and old pine. It smelled like the first summer after the house was finished, when my husband and I ate sandwiches on the floor because the table had not yet arrived. The same smell, only older, and it made me smile. At noon, Hannah called. "They've signed the voluntary release," she said. "The sheriff's confirmation is on file. You're the sole listed owner again. It's finished." "Finished," I repeated. The word felt strange, like a key turned in a door I hadn't realized was still locked. "You'll receive the final papers next week," she said. "If you need help with utilities or insurance changes, call me." "I will," I said. "Thank you, Hannah." After I hung up, I went outside. The sky was washed clean by rain. The maple tree shimmered, the red ribbon Diane had tied lifting and falling in a slow rhythm. The birdhouse door clicked once in the breeze. I took a small chair to the porch and sat with a notebook on my lap. I wrote 2 words on the top of the page: "My house." Then, under it, I wrote, "Still standing." A car pulled into the driveway just after sunset. I recognized the engine before I saw the headlights. Evan's truck. He got out slowly, carrying nothing, his shoulders hunched as if the night itself were pressing on him. He climbed the steps and stopped 3 feet away. His eyes were dark around the edges, like someone who hadn't slept. "I wanted to see it once more," he said. "It's the same house," I said. "No," he answered, "it isn't." He looked past me through the open door, to the hallway he had grown up in. For a long time neither of us spoke. The air between us was thin but not brittle. "I found your note," I said quietly. "The one you left." He nodded. "I meant it. I don't know how to undo a year." "You start by remembering what you broke," I said. "Then you stop trying to own what was never yours." He swallowed. "I thought I was helping. People who want control always think that." He stepped back and looked at the porch railing, the one he had helped paint when he was 10. "It still looks good," he said. "Good things last," I said, "even when people forget to take care of them." He hesitated, then said, "Do you want me to visit?" "Not yet," I said. "But someday, maybe, if you come as a guest, not a landlord." He nodded. Then he did something I hadn't expected. He reached out and touched the porch post, just once, as if saying goodbye. When he drove away, I watched until the taillights turned the corner and vanished. The street fell quiet again. The silence was different now, clean, not hollow. Inside, the house creaked, settling around me like a body finding its own rhythm again. I whispered to the walls, "We did it." That night, I left the bedroom door open and fell asleep to the sound of the wind brushing the maple leaves. Morning light filled the kitchen before I woke. The house was already warm. I walked barefoot across the floor, letting the boards greet me with their familiar uneven rhythm. On the counter, the framed deed caught the sunlight and threw a pale glow across the room. I made coffee and sat at the table with the papers Hannah had mailed overnight. Each page had an official seal, crisp and quiet. I ran my hand over the top page. The embossing left a faint circle under my fingertips, like a pulse. For the first time in a long while, I had no list to follow, no argument to prepare, only air, only light. Diane stopped by with a basket of muffins. "You look lighter," she said. "I am," I said. "The house is too." She smiled. "It feels different from across the street. Happier. It remembers how to breathe," I said. She looked around the porch, her eyes catching on the red ribbon, the clean boards. "You'll paint again this spring?" "I think so. Maybe blue this time, something soft." She nodded and squeezed my hand before leaving. After she was gone, I went back inside. The rooms were quiet but not empty. The echo of footsteps, old laughter, old pain, they were still here, but softer now, like memories moving into the attic where they belong. I opened the door to the small back room, the one Claire had called cozy. The curtains still hung uneven. I straightened it. Sunlight fell on the floorboards, revealing faint dust patterns shaped like footprints that were no longer there. I cleaned them with a damp cloth, humming to myself. When I finished, I carried a box of old things to the living room and began to unpack. A vase from our honeymoon, a photo of my husband in his work clothes, smiling under the half-built porch, a chipped mug with the words, Holland Hardware Fair, 1987. I placed them carefully on the shelves. Each object seemed to return a small piece of air to the room. At noon, I walked outside. The mail carrier waved and handed me a brown envelope. Inside was the final court certification. My name printed alone. Owner of record, Marley Holland. I stood by the fence and read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. The words didn't feel triumphant, they felt earned. That evening, I made soup again, the same recipe from years ago. Onions, carrots, a pinch of rosemary. The scent drifted through the house, settling into the walls. I imagined it filling the spaces where silence used to sit. I ate by the window, watching dusk gather. The streetlights came on one by one. I thought about Evan somewhere out there, perhaps in a rented apartment, perhaps thinking about the same house under a different sky. For the first time, the thought didn't hurt. It simply existed, like a scar you stop touching. After dinner, I carried the framed deed to the living room wall. I found the old nail above the mantel, still sturdy. I hung it there. The glass caught the reflection of the lamp. My name glowed faintly, steady as a heartbeat. I stepped back and whispered, "We are even now." Then, softer, "Thank you for waiting for me." The house said nothing, but a board near the hearth gave a small creak, like a nod. Outside, the maple swayed gently. The red ribbon brushed the birdhouse roof and stayed there, as if to say enough. For the first time in years, I turned off every light except one by the window. The glow spilled onto the porch and across the garden path. Inside, my heart was quiet. Not the silence of defeat, the silence that follows justice. Tomorrow would belong to something new. Spring came quietly that year. The air lost its winter steel and grew soft, and the earth under the maple loosened. The house smelled of soap and lemon oil, a clean scent that no longer tried to hide sorrow. Every window was open. The rooms breathed again. I began to tend the garden. The soil still remembered me. When I pressed my fingers into it, it broke apart easily, welcoming. The marigolds had survived the frost after all. Beneath the brittle stems, green shoots coiled upward. Life is stubborn that way. It keeps rehearsing itself until it gets another chance. Diane visited most mornings with her coffee. We didn't talk much. We watched the street and traded the kind of silences that friends earn over time. One morning, she said, "You should come to the community center this weekend. They're hosting an art fair, and the pottery class is showing their work." "Pottery class?" I said. "You remember the sign you stopped at last month?" she said. "I saw you looking. You should go." I smiled. "Maybe I will." That weekend, I put on a linen dress that still smelled faintly of cedar. The community center was bright with chatter and clay dust. Rows of tables were lined with bowls, mugs, vases. The air hummed with the satisfaction of people who had made something with their hands. I moved slowly between the tables, touching the edges of the pieces, feeling the heat they still carried from the kiln. At the last table sat a man arranging small planters shaped like birds. He was tall, his beard streaked with silver, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked up when he noticed me studying one of his pieces. "Be careful," he said, smiling. "That one still remembers the fire." I laughed. "Good. I like things that remember." He introduced himself as Arthur. His handshake was steady, the kind that doesn't try to prove anything. "You live near the maple with the red ribbon," he said. "You've noticed," I said. "I walk past most mornings," he said. "It always looks like it's waiting for something good to happen." "Maybe it already has," I said. We talked about the glaze that cracks like old river stones, about how clay forgives the hand that shapes it if you keep it wet long enough. He told me he'd moved to town last year after retiring from teaching. He said he liked fixing things that don't need fixing. I bought one of the small planters and promised to bring him a cutting from my marigolds. When I walked home, the sun followed me all the way down the block. That night, I placed the planter on the windowsill. The house caught the scent of earth again, faint but real. It felt like the first breath after a long dive. Over the next weeks, Arthur stopped by sometimes with coffee or clay on his hands. We never planned it. He would find me pruning roses, and we would talk. About books, about weather, about how the body forgets to hurry when the heart has learned patience. One afternoon, as we repaired the loose porch step, he asked, "Do you miss them?" I tightened the screw, watched the wood settle. "I miss the idea of them," I said. "But ideas are softer than people. They fade when you stop feeding them." He nodded. "Still, it takes strength to let a memory starve." "Strength or mercy," I said. He smiled. That quiet half-smile of people who understand pain but don't need to name it. Maybe both. When he left that evening, I watched him walk down the path and felt something unfamiliar. Not loneliness, not longing, just space, the kind that makes room for light to stretch. That night I wrote in my journal, "The garden has begun again. The marigolds are taller. The house breathes without effort. I am not rebuilding, I am continuing." I closed the book and let the wind through the open window turn the page on its own. Summer came early. The maple threw wide shadows across the porch, and the air carried the hum of bees. The birdhouse had new tenants, tiny gray birds with quick hearts. They darted in and out, building with the same small urgency I once felt. Arthur and I began to meet at the pottery class on Wednesdays. He claimed he came only to make sure the clay didn't misbehave, but I saw how his eyes softened when he shaped a bowl. I learned the rhythm of the wheel, the steady pull and release. Clay, like life, only resists when you force it. At home, I practiced on a small table by the window, using the clay kit I'd bought months ago. My hands were stronger now, not from fighting, but from making. Each piece I shaped felt like a conversation between me and the quiet. One evening, I opened the old fireproof box. The framed deed still lay inside, its glass smooth and cool. I lifted it out, not to check, not to confirm, just to see it under the light. I set it beside a new bowl I'd made, a shallow piece the color of the evening sky. Together, they looked like past and present, sitting side by side. I thought about my husband then, his laughter when he laid the first brick, his calloused hands holding mine, the way he used to say, "We build things so they can outlast us, not cage us." I whispered, "You were right." Later that week, Diane brought over a basket of peaches. "You should host a little gathering," she said. "Show off your garden. Let people see what's bloomed again." "I'm not much for gatherings," I said. "Then make it small," she said. "Invite the people who make you quiet inside, not loud." So I did. On Sunday, Arthur came early with a vase of wildflowers. Diane brought lemonade and her laughter. We set the table under the maple tree. The red ribbon above us flickered in the wind, faded now to rose gold. We ate, we talked. The conversation wandered like a stream unhurried, finding its own way. When the light softened toward evening, Arthur raised his glass and said, "To the woman who remembered her own name." Diane smiled. "And to the house that remembered her first." I felt the heat rise in my chest, not from embarrassment but from something warmer. I looked up at the maple leaves, green and new. The birds sang as if they had been waiting for their cue. After they left, I sat alone under the tree. The dishes were stacked, the glasses empty, the air fragrant with grass. The sky shifted from gold to blue, to the deep violet that means the day is keeping its promise. I closed my eyes and listened. The house behind me was still, content. The world had grown large again, and I was small inside it, but not lost. When I went inside, the framed deed still caught the light by the window. I traced the glass and whispered the last line I would ever write in my journal. Justice gave me back my house. Grace taught me how to live in it again. Then I placed the journal beside the clay bowl and turned off the lamp. Outside, the garden shimmered in the moonlight. The marigolds opened slightly in the warm night air. The house, my house, stood steady in its quiet. The second bloom had come, and this time, it would last.